You were just a kid. That's the part everyone forgets. That's the part that matters most. You weren't chosen because you were special. You weren't chosen because you were brave or smart or destined for something greater. You were chosen because you were there. Because your grandfather needed someone whose brainwaves canceled out his own. Because you were useful. That was it. That was the beginning. You were 14 years old and you didn't even know what a portal gun was. And you grew up in a house that felt like it was held together with arguments and leftovers. Your dad tried. Your mom tried. In their own ways, in their own broken ways, they tried. But you were the middle child of a family that was already coming apart at the seams before Rick ever showed up. And then Rick showed up, and everything changed. Not for the better, not for the worse. Just changed permanently, irreversibly, in ways you wouldn't fully understand until years later when you were sitting alone somewhere, trying to remember what normal felt like. You were just a kid, but nobody told the universe that. The first adventure felt like a dream. Alien planets, other dimensions, creatures that didn't have names in any human language. You were terrified and electric and alive in a way you had never been in any classroom or any living room or any ordinary Tuesday of your ordinary life. Rick looked at you and said you did good. That was all it took. That was all it ever took. Because here is the thing about growing up feeling invisible, feeling like the dumbest person in your family, the most forgettable kid in your school, the one nobody was worried about because worrying required noticing. When someone sees you, really sees you, you follow them anywhere. Even into danger, especially into danger. So you went back, and again, and again. And each time the danger got bigger. Each time the stakes got higher. Each time you came home with something new behind your eyes, something you couldn't explain to your friends, couldn't explain to your parents, couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't been there. You watched civilizations collapse. You held weapons that could erase planets. You made decisions that got people hurt. Real people, real consequences, real weight. And then you went to school the next morning, sat in math class, stared at the board, tried to care about fractions. Nobody knew. Nobody asked. Nobody noticed the way your hands shook sometimes when things got too quiet. You stopped trying to explain it. You stopped trying to process it. You just carried it, because that's what Rick did. And Rick was the strongest person you had ever seen. So you told yourself, if he can carry it, so can I. That was the first lie you told yourself. It wouldn't be the last. There was a version of you that got hard, not strong. Hard? Oh, there's a difference. Strong means you can take the weight and still feel it. Hard means you stopped feeling it. You saw it happen. You watched yourself change. The kid who used to cry on alien planets, who used to beg Rick to take him home, who used to throw up after the close calls. That kid got quieter, got colder, got faster at making decisions that used to keep him up all night. You stopped flinching, and part of you was proud of that. Part of you should have been terrified. Because Rick noticed. Rick always noticed. And there was something in his eyes when he looked at the harder version of you. Something that looked almost like guilt. Almost like he was seeing something he had built without meaning to. A reflection he didn't ask for. You didn't understand it then. You were at your peak. Keeping up with the smartest man in the universe. Surviving things that would break anyone else. Functioning, adapting, enduring. You told yourself you were growing up. You were. Just not in any way a 14-year-old was supposed to. You were growing up the way soldiers grow up. The way people grow up when the world asks too much of them too soon and never apologizes for it. Fast, brutal, without ceremony. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, somewhere between one impossible situation and the next, you realized something that changed everything. You couldn't imagine your life without him. Not because the adventures were exciting, not because you were addicted to the danger, because Rick was the only person who had ever made you feel like you mattered. Even if the way he showed it was broken, even if half the time you weren't sure if he actually cared or if you were just convenient, you needed him to need you. And he did. In his way. In his completely destructive, completely complicated, never going to say it out loud way. That was enough. It was never enough. It was always enough. There was a night you buried yourself. Not metaphorically. You actually stood over a grave. Your grave. A version of you that didn't make it. And Rick put his hand on your shoulder and said nothing. You waited for the wisdom, the lesson, the Rick Sanchez speech that would make it mean something. That would wrap it up in cynicism and science and make the unbearable feel manageable. It didn't come. He just stood there. And you just stood there. And the grave just sat there. And you understood something in that silence that no adventure had ever taught you. This was not a life being built. This was a life being spent. Every dimension you visited cost something. Every impossible situation left a mark. Every time you came home and pretended everything was fine, that cost something too. You had been paying and paying and paying, and nobody had ever told you what the total was going to be. You looked at Rick, really looked at him. Not as your grandfather, not as the smartest man in the universe, not as the person who chose you and made you feel like you mattered. Just as a man. A tired, broken, brilliant, lonely man who had been running from something for so long, he had forgotten what it was. And you realized you were starting to look like him. Not physically, not yet, but in the eyes. In the way you held yourself when things got bad. In the way you had started to reach for distance the same way he did. You were 14 when this started. You didn't know how old you felt right now. You still go. That's the part nobody understands. After everything, every scar, every nightmare, every version of yourself you've had to bury, you still go. Rick appears in your room at 2 in the morning. Flask in hand, portal gun ready. That look on his face that means everything is on fire somewhere in the multiverse, and you're the only one he's coming to. And you get up. Every time, you get up. Not because you're brave. Not because you're stupid. Not because you don't know better. Because you do know better. You know exactly what it costs. You know exactly what you're walking into. And you go anyway. Because somewhere underneath all the damage and the distance and the years of being used and needed and almost lost, you love him. Not the genius, not the legend, not the most dangerous man in the universe. The man who showed up, who chose you, who needed you even when he refused to say it. That's the thing about growing up next to someone like Rick Sanchez. It doesn't make you stronger. It doesn't make you smarter. It makes you his. And being his means you will always get up. You will always go. You will always be the one standing next to him when the rest of the universe has given up. Not because you can't leave. Because you looked at every version of yourself across every dimension. And the ones who left, they were never okay either. So you stay. You carry it. You show up. Because that's who you are, Morty. Not the sidekick, not the assistant, not the one with the canceled out brainwaves, the one who chose to stay. Over and over and over again. In a universe that never once made it easy.